Okay, today I got this 2004 Honda Accord here. I'm going to be doing the brakes, all four brakes all the way around. I'm going to do the pads and I'm going to do the rotors. This vehicle has pretty excessive brake pedal vibration, which we'll talk about that in a second, but basically it's thickness variations on the discs there. But so yeah, we'll be doing the discs and the pads all the way around, and we'll be I'll be replacing the fluid too. I'll show you how I drain and exchange out the fluid on these. And also, while I'm thinking of it, this vehicle, it's an EX model, so it has rear disc brakes. It does not have the drums back here, so your model may not look exactly like this on the back brakes. So I'll probably shoot this in a two-part video. I'll show the front brakes on one and the rear brakes on the other. But let's get started. Alright, here's the parts I'm going to be using. And if you've ever watched any of my videos, you know I like to use factory parts. But in this case, the factory parts are what failed on this. And vibrations in the disc or in the braking system is pretty common on Hondas, especially this vintage. So this is my go-to setup to try to eliminate the vibrations on the disc brake system. So we're going to go with centric rotors, the premium ones, and we're going to go with the Akebono Pro Act pads. These are the parts for the front. Right there, those are the rotors and the pads for the front. And then that's the part number for the rotors and the pads on the rear. And yeah, I've had really good luck getting rid of the vibrations in the braking system with this setup. Alright, as you can see, I already have the front lifted up off the ground and safely on jack stands. Don't get under a vehicle without jack stands. I was doing some other work on this vehicle, and that's why I already have it up in the air. If you want to know how to lift this vehicle properly in the air, I did a video on how to change the oil, and in it I show exactly how to do it. So we'll go ahead and get these lug nuts off. This one has a lock on the wheel. Come on, there we go. And if you don't have an impact wrench like this, you need to break these lug nuts loose while the vehicle's still touching the ground. Now, before we get started, let's talk a little bit. Why do we have vibration in the braking system? Why do we feel that pedal pulsation that's so common on these Hondas? It's basically, I mean, it can happen a couple different ways. You can have run out in the rotor or the hub behind this rotor, and basically what that is just, it's cockeyed, so it wobbles as it goes around. And or you have parallelism, where it's not straight and true, or the most common is you have disc thickness variations. And basically what that is you have high and low spots on your rotor. So in certain areas it's fat, in certain areas it's skinny. And so every time your rotor spins and comes around, it makes contact here, and that high spot forces your brakes open. And then as you're clamping down with your brake, your foot on the brake, as it gets past that low spot, then it goes back down. So the high spot is forcing your caliper back open like that every single time that high spot comes around. And that's the biggest cause of it. Now, why does it happen? There's a lot of controversy on how it happens. Some people say that they get really hot, which they do get hot. They get really hot and warp. I don't feel that's the case. What I believe happens, and I've studied this a lot, is the resins inside the brake pads get onto the rotor. And what happens is they create a high spot. And so every time the rotor spins around, that high spot makes contact with the brake pad, and a little bit more of that brake pad, it's left right at that spot on the rotor. And so gradually over time, that high spot, millions of times this rotor spins around, that high spot hits the brake pad, leaves a little bit, leaves a little bit, leaves a little bit, and pretty soon it builds up enough thickness where you can start feeling it in the pedal. In most cases on these Hondas, that's what's happening. Oh, and while I'm thinking of it, one more area where you can damage your rotors is by putting the lug nuts on like a gorilla and just clamping them down way too hard. And what that does is this hat right here gets distorted, and it can actually bend a little bit and tweak the rotor so that every time it goes around you feel the variations. That is a possibility also. That's another common area where somebody just hammers these lug nuts down with an impact way too much and distorts the hat on the rotor. So that can definitely be a problem also. Now on this vehicle, the brake fluid's a little bit dirty. So what I'm going to do, seeing as I'm doing all the brakes, I'm also going to flush out this fluid. So what I like to do is I'll take the old fluid down to the minimum, where the minimum mark is on the reservoir here, and so I'll take that old fluid out, I'll replace it with brand new fluid, and then we'll go to each wheel and basically do the same thing like you would if you were bleeding the brakes. And so that's what we're going to do. Now, because I'm doing a flush and I don't suspect that there's any air in the system, I could probably do the little flushing procedure in any sequence that I wanted to. But as a rule, I like to do the brakes and do the flushing in the same order that you would a normal bleeding. And on this vehicle, these 04 or actually 03 to 07 Accords, you do the left front first, and then the right front, and then the right rear, and then finally the left rear. So that's the sequence. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. And so because of that bleed sequence, what I'm going to do is we'll start with the fluid there, and then right after that I will do the brakes on each wheel in that order. So I'll start with this one, then that one, then I'll do the rear, and then the other rear I'll end up with that one. And so what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and film this one, and I'll film that one. I'll just film one side so you can see what it's like. So I'll usually put some paper towels around so we don't spill anything. Just twist that. Take the cap off. Now I have a bottle that I just used for used brake fluid, and so I'll be putting it in there. And you can either use a turkey baster, something like this, to suck the fluid out and put it in there. But in my experience, I've learned these things will spill brake fluid all over the place, and this stuff eats your paint, so I don't use these anymore. What I use is just a little pump like this. I have these for the brake fluid. I even use these for the power steering fluid on these too. When I need to suck the power steering fluid up, I just use these. So basically, I'll just put the. Oh, we got to take the. We got to take the screen out. Take the screen out. We'll just put this end in, just like that, and I'll just stick it in an angle down in the master cylinder there. Put the other end right in my brake fluid container. And you can see, just pumping it right out. Boom, just like that. I took it right down to the minimum that fast. Without spilling a drop. So I definitely like these. If I can find the link to it, I'll put it in the description. And then I'm using Honda .3 brake fluid, unopened bottle. So I'll go ahead and pop it open. And I'll go ahead and pour some new fluid in. And I went ahead and filled it all the way up because I'm going to be bleeding it and pulling some down. And while I'm thinking of it, when I'm sucking the fluid out, I don't go below the minimum mark on the master cylinder. I don't want air to get in the system, because then you'll be bleeding the whole thing out again, and you're going to get air into your ABS lines and stuff, and it can become a nightmare to get it out. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and turn the wheel, get a good angle on the caliper. And we'll go ahead and pull the little rubber dust cover off. Alright, next up we're going to have to break this bleeder loose. You can use a wrench. Normally I will like to use a deep socket so I can get over it with a 6-point, so I don't round the corners off, because these things sometimes are on there tight. Just be careful, you live in the Rust Belt, you can easily break these things right off. Alright, so usually you just break it loose, and then I'll just leave it just semi-tight like that, and then I will use a wrench to crack it loose. That way I can loosen it and tighten it just like that. And I'll take a bottle like this with some clear tubing, and I'll let you in on my little secret. This tubing is actually for the windshield wiper fluid. So these are the lines. You can buy a 25-foot section from Honda, and it fits perfectly over these bleeder valves. So that's what I'm using, and I have a little bit of clean brake fluid on the bottom. And so what I'll do is I'll connect it, and then we'll just pump up the brakes and we'll loosen it and drain some of this fluid until we get new fluid in. Alright, now I'm going to have an assistant press the brake pedal 3 times and then hold it down. And while they're holding it down, then I'll crack the bleeder loose. Okay, go ahead and pump and hold. And we'll crack it loose, and you can see old fluid coming out. Okay, pump and hold. Okay, pump and hold. Okay, pump and hold. Okay, pump and hold. And we're just going to keep doing that until I have nice clean fluid. And I'm almost there, so I'll just do it a couple more times. I'll be sure to keep an eye on the master cylinders while I'm doing this, so we don't go too low. And once we're done, we just pull it off, put the cap back on. This side's done. Alright, now I was keeping an eye on the master cylinder, and it went down quite a ways while I did the brakes, bleeding them out, and but I'm still above the minimum. And this is good. I'm going to leave it right there, because now when I push the calipers back in, the pistons, the fluid will rise back up and it won't overflow. So right there I'm happy. We have nice clean fluid in there, and we're not going to spill the fluid all over the car. And as you can see, I started off with clean fluid in there, and you can see how dirty and nasty that stuff is. Now there was a little bit of dirt in there, but as you can see, the stuff that was in there was pretty dirty, so I'm glad we cleaned it out. Alright, first thing, take off this brake hose bolt. This is a 12mm. And then we'll take off these 2 caliper bolts. These are also 12s. And we'll just lift the caliper up and off. And then as soon as we have it right here, we'll turn it over. We'll take the old brake pad right here. You can see there's still plenty of friction material on these, but because the rotors are bad, might as well replace it all right now. We'll put that on there. And you'll need some kind of tool like this. And all I'm going to do is push. I'm going to use this tool to push the piston back in. And I'll be keeping an eye on the master cylinder making sure it doesn't overflow. I'm going to do it nice and easy. I'm just going to push it all the way back in. Until it stops right there. Now the caliper piston is pushed all the way back in. Alright, with some safety glasses, I'll just take a steel brush, clean off the face of the piston here nice and gently, and clean off the contact here. Making sure they're free of debris and rust and stuff. And then we'll go ahead and, let's see. I don't want to get the brake hose twisted around. Take our hook. We'll hook it up here. That way it's out of the way and it's not hanging on the brake hose. And while we're right here, we'll just pull the other pad out. And now we're going to use a 17mm socket, and we'll get the two caliper mounting bolts. Just like that. Alright, now using an impact driver with a Phillips attachment, we're going to take those two screws out that hold the rotor on. Now the way this one works, put it in there and you have to apply pressure in the direction you want it to turn. So in this case we want it to loosen. So I'll be applying pressure like that. And then we just hit it. You see it loosens them right up. Do the other one. Just like that. Now these probably had anti-seize in here and that's why they came out so easy. And you can see, yeah, they did. And we'll just take the screws out and just take the rotor off. Now, if the rotor's stuck, take a hammer, hit right here, loosen it up. In this case, I didn't need to. We'll just take the rotor off. Alright, now we'll just straighten this out. And you see all the rust and stuff here? That rust can build up and jack the rotor out a little bit and cause unevenness, and that can eventually lead to vibration. So if we don't clean that rust up, you can slap new rotors on here and your vibration can come right back within 5,000 or 10,000 miles. So let's go ahead and clean that rust up. Okay, I'm going to use this special attachment that goes over the studs to help clean, and then I'll just use a normal one for in between. And I'll be using my new Chicago pneumatic angle die grinder since I broke my last one. Alright, now I like to put something on here after I clean it up to prevent the rust. In this case I'm going to use some fluid film. Just a little bit. I usually just move it around. You can use anti-seize if you like also. I use that sometimes also. It's a good idea to get right along the edge too. That way you don't have a rust build up when your rotor goes over the top and prevents it from coming off. Alright, now we'll clean this up. I like to clean the anti-rattle clips or use new ones. In this case, these are in good shape. I'll just clean them up. So we'll clean these up and the areas underneath, and then we'll clean the slide pins. So all I do is take wire brush, wire brush it off, being careful not to hit the boot, and then I'll pop these anti-rattle clips off and clean underneath too. We'll get it nice and clean under here, because what happens, rust will build up under here and move those anti-rattle clips up, and it'll squeeze your pads together, and then they'll not move freely, which can cause them to heat up and seize on there. So we'll get these all cleaned up, and I'll show you what it looks like at the end. And I'm just cleaning these up also right here where it makes contact. I'll clean these too. Alright, as you can see, I got those contacts. I got those shined up pretty nice. These cleaned up nice. If the anti-rattle clips weren't in good shape, I would have, get a new set. And I'm thinking of it, so it goes on the car like this. And so we'll go ahead and take these pins out, and we'll clean them off. And while I'm thinking of it, do one pin at a time. Because if you noticed, this one has a rubber tip on there. The top one on these Honda calipers on the front have a rubber tip. And if you get this in the wrong place, you put it down here, that can do the same thing. That can cause or lead to vibrations and pulsation in your brake system. So that's why I advise just do one at a time so you don't get them mixed up. But if you do, put this rubber one on the top. Now I'm just using a little 3M silicone paste. You don't need to put a ton on there, but you got to get some on there. And then we'll put it back in. And we just want it in a neutral position, kind of right there. We don't want it smashed in there. We don't want it puffed out like that, because that can put pressure on your system. So just right in the middle, and it should move freely, just like that. So we'll do the same thing with the other one. And you can see this one does not have any rubber piece on there. And it needs to pop over the end just like that. There we go. While I'm thinking of it, these Akibono pads did come with this Moly brake lube, and you can definitely use this on the anti-rattle clips and the shims, which I'll show you here in a second. We'll go ahead and open up this rotor. And if you notice, I'm using clean gloves and a clean rag. Just gonna use a little bit of brake clean. Make sure there's no contaminants on this. The main part you got to worry about is right here. Alright, let's go put it on the car. Okay, using clean gloves, we got to line up those two holes with the two holes right here, because that's where the screws go back in. Come on. So just put it back on there with the mounting screws right there. I'm just going to put just a little bit of anti-seize on these screws and put them in there just like that. And I'm only putting a tiny bit. Stuff gets everywhere. But this will definitely help take these off next time. Let's get those screws snug. Alright, now we can move that back over. We'll get our caliper mounting bracket back on. And what I like to do, just put a little bit of this brake grease on the ends, front and back, or top and bottom of these anti-rattle clips. Then we just snap them back in place, just like that. Just make sure you don't have any in the middle right there. If you do, wipe it off right on the edge, because this is right where the caliper goes. So yeah, just a little bit, that's all I put. And this is what I'm using, Permatex Ceramic Extreme Brake Parts Lubricant. Stuff seems pretty good. I don't use too much, just a little bit. And if I wanted, I could put it right there too. Just my habit is to put them right on here. And if you're ever curious why the brush is bent, that's so you can get in the bottom corners of the bottle. So it is done for a reason. Alright, as soon as we got it right here, we'll go ahead and mount this bracket back on here. Put our two bolts that we took off back in. I always start my bolts by hand. Then I'll just tack them down with this. And then these bolts are 80 foot-pounds, so we'll go ahead and grab a torque wrench, tuck them down to 80 foot-pounds. Alright, there we go. It's actually like 79.6 foot-pounds or something ridiculous like that, but 80 is close enough. Alright, make sure you got your pads in the correct position. You should have two like this, and then you should have two pads with a wear indicator on the back there. That wear indicator goes on the inside pad, and it goes in the up position on top, so that as the rotor rotates, that's the first place it's going to contact is up there. Now we'll just pop these shims off. Just like that. And then Honda recommends you put brake grease on the back of these shims. Whoops. So I just put a thin coat. And put it right back on there. And I do the same for the other pad, so both pads get a little bit of brake grease on the inside. Just a thin coat, don't have to slosh it on there. And then Honda recommends putting it on the other side too, right where it contacts the caliper. So in this case you can look over and see where the caliper touches the old one and just put it on the new one the same way. Same thing with this side, right here. Just remember, you only need a little bit, just a thin coat, and this will help stop your brakes from squealing. Alright, making sure our gloves are nice and clean so we're not contaminating the pads. I'll go ahead and put just a little bit on the ears. Honda recommends you put just a little bit of brake grease on the ears. And then we'll go ahead and put our pad in there. Let me just slide it up in there. Right into place, just like that. Alright, and this is where I'm very meticulous about being clean. Make sure, wipe off in case you got anything on the on your hands, make sure you wipe them off. And if you get anything on the friction material, either the friction material itself here or the rotor, make sure to clean it off. Use some brake clean, clean it off. So we'll just take this one and we'll do the same thing. Pop it up in there and just slide it right into place, just like that. So make sure the friction material is to the inside, just like that. Alright, now we could take our caliper where it's hanging, take it off. We'll just put it right back over. And if you look right here, you see these are keyed so that it goes in there and stops from turning right against there. So make sure you have it in the right position, just like that. And then we'll put our bolt in. Bottom one is the same way. It's also keyed. You gotta make sure to get it in the same way. Just like that. And we'll go ahead and torque these down. Alright, now these are 26 foot-pounds. So we'll just torque them to 26, which isn't very much. You can see right there. Just like that. So just make sure that bolt's torqued, that bolt's torqued, this one's torqued, this one's torqued. Now we need to put this one back on. This one's also 12 millimeter, if I didn't mention it. Helps to use a deep socket here, just to get up and over this fitting. Just get it snug, that's all you gotta do. I think it's something like 8 pounds, so you don't have to crank that thing down. Alright, now that I got it all put back together, I'll just straighten out the wheels. And I'll pump up the brakes a couple times. Make sure I got a good brake pedal. There we go, right there. And then if I was only doing the front brakes, I would lower it back down, top off the master cylinder, and then take it for a test drive and do a bed-in process, which I'll explain here in a bit. But now I'm going to go ahead and do the rear brakes also. And I'll film that, but that'll be in part 2. So if you want to see the rear brakes, make sure you watch part 2.